She was just a barista, until one moment changed everything. When Nina Ellis answered a phone call in a foreign language to help a stranger, she didn't know she was rewriting her fate. From a quiet cafe to a global summit, from betrayal to redemption, her journey is a powerful reminder that even the overlooked can become unforgettable. This isn't just a love story. It's a story of courage, truth, and finding your voice when it matters most. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below, and don't forget to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more life-changing tales. The espresso machine hissed behind her like a restless dragon, but Nina Ellis barely flinched. She moved with practiced grace behind the counter of Café Lumen, scribbling orders on tiny notepads, pouring almond milk with one hand while balancing a tray with the other. Her name tag had long since faded, but no one asked her name anyway. Most customers never looked up from their phones, until that morning. The man at table 4 had been pacing for the last 10 minutes, his voice sharp and frustrated as he spoke into his phone. He was dressed like power, tailored charcoal gray coat, Italian leather shoes, but the stress in his jaw betrayed the control he was rapidly losing. No, listen to me. I said the licensing terms are non-negotiable. If they don't agree to Clause 7, we walk. What do you mean they're confused? It's clearly. He stopped mid-sentence, pulling the phone away from his ear as though the foreign words were physically grating. Nina passed by his table with a fresh pot of coffee and a soft automatic smile, but paused when she caught the familiar intonation of Korean. Not textbook Korean, but the clipped, formal dialect used in high-level business negotiations. She hesitated only a second before speaking. "Excuse me," she said quietly, "but I speak Korean. I overheard. You're trying to finalize a contract?" The man turned, startled. His eyes were a shade too pale to be friendly, but his brow eased slightly at the offer. "You do?" She nodded. "I lived in Seoul for 2 years. If you'd like, I could try." He passed her the phone wordlessly. Nina held it to her ear and bowed slightly as she spoke, her voice gentle but assertive. Her Korean was fluid, respectful, precise. She asked for clarification, explained the misunderstood clause, and proposed a wording alternative that made both legal and cultural sense. The voice on the other end softened, laughter even. Nina smiled faintly. She repeated the new terms, verified the email address, and ended the call with a formal thank you. She handed the phone back and reached into her apron, scribbling a summary on the back of a receipt. They agreed to Clause 7, if you reword it as conditional licensing and send confirmation by 3 p.m. Seoul time. They'll proceed with the joint patent submission after that. The man blinked at her like she'd just rewritten gravity. He shook his head. "You have no idea how badly this deal was unraveling." Nina shrugged lightly, the way people do when they've been surviving on instinct so long. Compliments feel foreign. "I'm just glad I could help." She started to walk away, but his voice followed her. "Wait, what's your name?" She paused. "Nina." He stood, reaching into his jacket, pulling out a heavy white business card. "Damien Cross, CEO, Crosstech Global. If you ever want to work somewhere that actually uses your talent, call me." She took the card, unsure whether to smile or run. "I'm just a barista," she said, almost apologetically. Damien didn't blink. "No, you're not." He left without waiting for a response. Nina stood still for a moment, staring at the card in her hand. The cafe noise returned in waves, the clinking of cups, the low hum of morning chatter, but her mind had gone quiet. Back home that evening, after walking her younger brother Zane back from therapy, she tucked the business card into the back of her battered notebook. The same one filled with handwritten Korean phrases and dreams she hadn't dared chase in years. She sat beside Zane as he drew spaceships and stars in blue crayon and let herself, just for a moment, imagine what it would be like to be seen. She had no idea that a single act of translation had already rewritten the course of her life. 2 days after the cafe encounter, Nina found herself staring at a sleek black car parked outside her building like it had taken a wrong turn into the wrong life. She lived on the 3rd floor of a faded brick complex with more leaks than windows, but the driver, in a crisp black suit, didn't seem lost. He stepped out, looked straight at her as she came down the stairs, and said, "Miss Ellis, Mr. Cross requests your presence for a meeting at 11 a.m. today. Transportation's arranged." She almost laughed, almost. "Is this a prank?" "No, ma'am. He opened the door. Her shift didn't start for another 3 hours, and Zane was at school until 4. Against every reasonable instinct, she slid into the leather seat. The building they arrived at downtown felt like something from another universe. All glass and steel, rising into a sky she hadn't had time to look at in years. Inside, she was led up to the 37th floor, through a marble lobby where everyone looked like they belonged to important calendars. The conference room was minimalist and intimidating. Long table, wide windows, the city sprawling below. Damien Cross stood at the far end, rolling up his sleeves like he'd just come from solving 10 crises. "Nina," he said, walking toward her. "Thank you for coming." "I wasn't sure I had a choice," she said, half joking. He gave a crooked smile. "There. I wanted to ask you something personally. We have an upcoming partnership with the Korean Ministry of Digital Education. It's sensitive, technical, and full of potential landmines. I need someone who understands the culture and the language. I want you on the team as a consultant." She blinked. "I serve espresso and run my brother's meds on a color-coded chart. That doesn't scream international consultant." "I don't care about your resume," Damien said, his voice low and firm. "I care about what I saw. Someone who listens, who speaks with intention, who doesn't panic when the stakes are high. That's what this needs." She shifted, uncertain. "I can't work full-time. My brother, he needs round-the-clock care. We don't have help. I do this alone." Damien studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come with me." He led her to a smaller room, walls of glass, soft lighting, a minimalist desk with a dual-monitor setup already configured. "You'll work remotely. Flexible hours. We'll pay you industry rate, no questions asked. There's a secure network, translation software, a direct line to the team. You'll have complete control." It felt like a setup too perfect to be real. She stared out the window, trying to picture her own name on any of these walls. "Why are you doing this?" "Because people like you don't usually get seen in places like this," he said. "But you should." That night, Nina watched Zane sleep with one arm tucked around a pillow shaped like a rocket ship. The ceiling fan hummed softly, and the lights from the street outside flickered against the blinds. Her laptop sat open on the table beside her, and on the screen was a non-disclosure agreement with her name at the top. She read it 5 times before she clicked accept. The days that followed were a blur of newness, learning Crosstech's internal language, drafting translation glossaries, coordinating with Korean contacts via video calls that started at dawn. Nina didn't sleep much, but she didn't mind. For the first time in years, she felt more than useful. She felt necessary. A week later, Damien called her into a virtual team meeting to review the main campaign slogan. Nina suggested a phrasing that didn't just work in Korean, but evoked a cultural nuance lost in English. The call went quiet, then applause, a real round of it. Later that day, an unexpected package arrived at her door. Inside was a black leather notebook and a note. For the woman rewriting the script. DC. She smiled for a long time, clutching the notebook to her chest. Not because it was fancy, but because someone had finally noticed she had something to say. The air in Vancouver was crisp, with a sky so clean it looked almost artificial. Nina stepped out of the car, her palms sweating inside her coat pockets, despite the chill. The invitation to join Crosstech's team for the South Korea-US Digital Summit had come with less than 24 hours' notice. Damien had called personally, his voice unusually urgent. "They've moved up the signing window. I need you there. You're the only one who gets both the words and the space between them." She wanted to say no. Zane had cried that morning when she kissed his forehead goodbye. But she also remembered the look in Damien's eyes the day she corrected an entire clause with one sentence and changed the course of a 6-figure negotiation. She couldn't ignore that kind of faith. So she came. The hotel conference center was all glass and navy blue accents, with flags of both nations lining the hallway like silent witnesses. Nina walked alongside Damien into the main boardroom, where 5 Korean delegates sat like statues in suits, their faces impassive. She was introduced as our cultural strategist. One of them blinked, then nodded. She translated Damien's opening remarks, carefully adjusting tone and register, softening the edges without dulling the intent. The older delegate, Minister Lee, occasionally narrowed his eyes as if testing her fluency. She never missed a beat. For 2 hours, the room was a tightrope walk, figures and clauses, quiet nods, and subtle smiles. Nina found her rhythm, matching Damien's tone, smoothing over linguistic sharpness, elevating misunderstandings into moments of unexpected rapport. She even translated a subtle proverb used by a junior delegate into a Western idiom that made everyone chuckle. Damien glanced at her with quiet approval. But the applause wouldn't last. The next morning, an emergency team meeting was called. The air was heavy before anyone spoke. "We have a problem," said Monica Vale, Crosstech's senior communications lead. She stood at the front of the room holding a printed article, one that had just been published in a major Korean business outlet. "Last night, a leaked draft of our contract went public," she continued. 3 clauses were mistranslated in a way that implies an exploitative licensing model. The ministry is furious. Damien's face paled. "That's impossible." "All signs point to the translator file submitted by Nina Ellis," Monica said, her voice icy but composed. Nina froze. "No, that's not." She fumbled through her phone, pulling up her final file, the one she had personally encrypted and sent from her Crosstech portal. "I double-checked everything," she said, her voice shaking. "The original is correct." Monica held up another file. Identical layout, identical timestamp, except the 3 key terms were subtly wrong. "This is what was sent." Nina stared at the screen. Her head buzzed like it was full of static. "I didn't send that version." "No one else had access," Monica replied, her tone firm. "Your login credentials were used after hours from a remote device." Nina turned to Damien. His eyes were unreadable. Not cold, not kind, just distant. "We'll suspend access while we conduct an internal review," Monica added. "It's standard." Nina nodded numbly. Her voice failed her. She packed her things in silence. No one spoke. Damien didn't look her way again. That night, back home, Zane tugged on her sleeve and handed her a sketch. 2 stick figures, one crying, one standing in shadow. It broke her. She didn't sleep. At 3 a.m., she sat in the kitchen, sipping cold tea, rereading every file she'd ever sent. The same questions spinning over and over. Why her? Why now? Then she remembered something. Monica had asked her for a quick draft review 2 days earlier. "Just 10 minutes, she'd said. "I'll handle the formatting after." Nina had been tired, distracted, trusting. Her laptop buzzed with a new email. No subject, no sender, just one line. "Check the metadata." Attached a file named versionhistory.zip. Her breath caught. A part of her wanted to delete it, to run. But another part, the one that had learned Korean from thrifted textbooks and kept believing when no one else did, clicked it open. She leaned in and found the first trace of truth. The office was dark when Nina slipped through the side entrance, her hoodie pulled low over her forehead and her fingers gripping a borrowed keycard like it might burn through her skin. It was nearly 2 a.m. The world outside was asleep, but inside her chest was a storm she couldn't outrun. The file Monica claimed she had sent, Nina knew she hadn't. But knowing wasn't enough. She needed proof. The USB she'd received hours ago pulsed cold in her coat pocket. The metadata trail was vague, but pointed to one thing. The file had been accessed and altered under her login credentials, after midnight, from a location not tied to her IP. The trail wasn't obvious. It had been scrubbed, but not perfectly. Someone had been in a rush. She took the elevator to the 37th floor, every ping making her flinch. If security found her here, she'd be escorted out or worse. But Damien had always told the team, "If you don't dig, you'll only ever find the surface." So she dug. She plugged in the USB and opened the trace logs. Each file told a different piece of the story. Her original draft, clean, time-stamped. Then an access from a secondary device listed under an admin override. Username MeVale01, Monica's shadow account. Nina's heart pounded in her ears. She exported the logs, printed hard copies, highlighted the changes, and then she heard it. The soft, unmistakable sound of the elevator. Footsteps. Panic surged. She ducked into the nearest meeting room, pressing herself against the glass wall, breathing so shallow it barely counted. The footsteps passed. Whoever it was didn't stop. She waited. 1 minute, then 2. When she finally emerged, she nearly collided with Damien. He looked stunned. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I can prove it," she whispered, holding up the printouts like a shield. "It wasn't me." He stared at her, then slowly reached for the papers. His eyes scanned the pages, his brow tightening. When he finished, he said nothing. just turned and walked toward his office. Nina followed. Inside, the lights flicked on automatically, casting long shadows across the floor. Damien sat, motioned for her to do the same. She hesitated, then lowered herself into the chair opposite him. The clock behind him ticked too loudly. "She used my credentials," Nina said quietly. "You can trace the IP. It came from a remote login. She knew I'd trust her with the formatting. She knew you'd doubt me." "I didn't doubt you," Damien said, voice low. "I questioned the facts, but I never doubted you." Nina blinked. "Then why didn't you say anything?" "I needed to see if you would still come back," he said, "even when it felt like everything was against you." Her throat tightened. "You were testing me?" "I was hoping," he said simply, "that you'd still fight." He stood, pulled his phone from his pocket, and made a call. "Put IT on Monica Vale's system. Full trace. Audit her access logs, remote devices, email syncs. Don't tell her. I want everything in my office by morning." He ended the call and looked at Nina. "You walk back in here with evidence, calm, composed, and right. That matters. I'll fix the rest." She couldn't speak, afraid her voice would crack. He leaned forward, his gaze softening. "This world isn't fair," he said. "But I'll be damned if I let it eat someone like you alive." She stood slowly, the adrenaline fading into something heavier, exhaustion maybe, or relief. She turned to leave, then stopped. "Thank you," she said. Damien nodded. "Get some sleep, Nina. This isn't over yet, but it's about to be." The next morning, Monica didn't show up to work. By noon, the internal team had cleared Nina's name, but no company-wide announcement came, no apology memo, just silence. Until an hour later when her phone buzzed. New email, Geneva Initiative Summit Strategic Invite, Nina Ellis. Attached a boarding pass. First class. Departure tonight. Damien's message came separately. "The UN is watching. I want them to see what brilliance actually looks like. Let's finish this together." Nina stared at the screen, then at her brother's drawing still taped to her wall. This time, she didn't hesitate. She packed. The villa sat on the edge of Lake Geneva like it had always belonged to another century. Stone archways, sweeping balconies, and white roses trailing over every surface like whispered blessings. For 2 weeks, it served as the retreat for an elite team of international advisors, negotiators, and strategists gathered for the UN's Global Digital Education Initiative. And among them, Nina Ellis. Her badge no longer read Consultant in Training. It read Strategic Linguistic Liaison, Cross-Tech Global. Damien made sure of that. The days were filled with briefings, high-level sessions, and cross-cultural panels. The evenings drifted into long dinners on candlelit terraces and quiet conversations over espresso and dark Swiss chocolate. Nina never forgot where she came from, but for the first time in years, she wasn't simply surviving. She was present, visible, heard. It was during one of those dusky evenings that she found herself alone in the villa's library, pulled in by the scent of leather-bound books and a flickering fireplace. Damien was there already, seated in a deep armchair, a book forgotten in his lap as he stared out over the lake. He noticed her but didn't speak right away. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from him. She sat, folding her hands in her lap. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was a kind of peace neither of them had known before. "It suits you," he said finally, voice low. She tilted her head, unsure. "The room? This place. The calm. You." She smiled softly. "I'm still figuring out if I belong." "You do," he said, without hesitation. They sat like that for a while, letting the fire do the talking. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a slim, elegant box, sliding it across the small table between them. Nina opened it slowly. Inside was a fountain pen, midnight blue enamel with silver trim. Her initials were engraved in fine cursive along the barrel. "For what you've written," Damien said, "and what you will." Her breath caught. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," he replied. "You've already said more in silence than most people do in speeches." Later that night, back in her suite, she set the pen gently on her nightstand and stared at it like it was a relic. Not because of its beauty, but because of what it represented. Acknowledgement. Faith. A future. The last day of the summit arrived in a blur of preparations. Nina and Damien stood side by side during the final strategy session. Their contributions, his clarity, her nuance, had become inseparable. Delegates noticed. UN officials took notes. Something was shifting. That night, in the villa's old stone kitchen, as the sun dipped behind the Alps, they stood sipping espresso, the hum of the retreat now behind them. She reached for a file. His hand brushed hers. "You're the first person I've ever wanted beside me," Damien said, his voice almost unsure. "Not behind, not following, beside." Nina didn't answer. She just let her fingers linger on his. 2 months later, beneath the warm sky over Lake Como, guests gathered at a sun-drenched castle veiled in ivy and white blossoms. The air was perfumed with lavender and citrus, and the cobblestone courtyard had been transformed into something out of a whispered dream. Nina stood at the top of the aisle in a gown of clean white silk. No lace, no glitter, just the kind of elegance that didn't beg to be noticed. In her hand was not a bouquet, but the same midnight blue pen. A symbol, a promise. Damien stood at the altar in dove-gray linen, not a CEO, not a public figure, just a man waiting for the woman who had rewritten his world. When it was her turn to speak, Nina looked into his eyes and began, in Korean. "I will be your voice when you are quiet, your silence when you just want to feel." Then in English, steady and full, "I will be the translator of your heart for the rest of our lives." From the front row, Zane clapped first, a smile lighting up his entire face. And as white petals fell from above like blessings, Nina and Damien sealed their vow with a kiss. Not a performance, but a punctuation mark. The end of a sentence that began years ago in a cafe and the beginning of everything after. Sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with a single, quiet moment, one act of courage, one voice raised not in noise but in clarity. Nina's story reminds us that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be the most impactful. You don't need a perfect resume or a polished past. What matters is showing up. When it's inconvenient, when you're afraid, when you've been overlooked for too long. It's in those moments that true strength reveals itself. This story also teaches us that the right people will not only see your worth, but will protect it when the world tries to tear it down. Trust, once earned in silence, speaks volumes. And love, real love, isn't born from grand gestures, but from choosing someone again and again, especially when the lights aren't on them. Nina didn't wait for a perfect life to arrive before she used her voice. She translated more than words. She translated trust, presence, and quiet dignity into every room she entered. Her path wasn't straight. It was layered with sacrifice, misunderstanding, and pain. But because she never stopped believing she had something to offer, the world finally listened. So if you're watching this today, wondering if you're invisible, wondering if your quiet efforts matter, the answer is yes. You are seen, you are powerful, and your voice, however small, can still change everything. Now I'd love to know, where are you watching from? What part of the world are you in right now? And if this story touched your heart, subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more tales of resilience, love, and the quiet magic of believing in yourself. Your next favorite story might just be one click away.